My granddaughter was arrested for drug trafficking at 20, sentenced to 15 years. Everyone said she was guilty. The state police, the prosecutors, even her public defender told her to take the plea deal. But I knew she was telling the truth. I knew my Clara wasn't capable of that. So, I did something nobody expected. I went back to the same state correctional facility where I'd worked for 4 decades, first as a records clerk, and eventually as the chief of documentation. I went back as a volunteer. I went back to prove she didn't do it. The first visit, she had a cut above her eye, and her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She was terrified. I taught her how to survive, who to avoid, where to sit, how to stay alive in there. But surviving wasn't enough. I needed proof. And the moment I started looking for it, everything changed. An officer I'd known for years started watching me. Someone left a warning note in my car. They wanted me to stop. But stopping wasn't an option for me. My name is Eleanor Vance, and this is my story. Before we continue, please take a moment right now and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the Never Too Old channel. We're creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the story. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. I knew before I picked it up. You don't work in a high-security prison for 40 years without learning what a middle-of-the-night phone call means. Nothing good happens at 2 a.m. Mrs. Vance. The voice was young, authoritative. This is Officer Davis with the state police. Your granddaughter, Clara Vance, has been arrested. I sat up. The room was silent except for the humming of the refrigerator. What's the charge? I asked, my voice flat. Drug trafficking, ma'am. She's being held without bail until arraignment. My hand was shaking as I hung up. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I didn't ask if she was okay. I already knew she wasn't. I raised Clara from the time she was 5 years old. Her mother, my daughter Sarah, died of an overdose that year. Fentanyl. Sarah had been struggling since Clara's father left when Clara was 3. One bad choice led to another. And then one day I got a different kind of phone call. The kind where they tell you your daughter is gone, and there's a little girl who needs you. Clara's biological father lived in Nevada by then. Still does. He sent a sympathy card and a check for $100 when Sarah died. Never met Clara, not even once. So it was just us, me, and this quiet, hurting little girl who didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming back. Clara grew up distant. Too strict, she said. Too controlling. She couldn't see that I was trying to keep her from walking the same dark path her mother did. Or maybe she could see it and that made her angrier. By the time she was 17, we barely spoke except to argue. She stayed out late, started hanging around with people who made my stomach clench. Came home smelling like cheap liquor and worse. I tried talking to her, tried grounding her. Nothing worked. Then, about 9 months ago, she started seeing Elias Thorne. I knew he was trouble the first time I saw him. 26 years old, too polished, drove a sports car that cost more than $250,000. He showed up at our house with rare exotic flowers and that smile that felt like a sales pitch. Clara was 20 by then, thought she was deeply in love. He's not good for you, I told her bluntly. You don't know him, Grandma, she shot back. I know his type. She looked at me like I was the main obstacle to her happiness. You never want me to be happy. You never have. That was the last real conversation we had before the arrest. At the police station, they made me wait in a dull beige room with buzzing fluorescent lights and rigid plastic chairs. An officer brought Clara out in metal handcuffs. Her face was puffy and blotchy from crying. Her usually neat hair was disheveled, and her eyeliner was smeared halfway down her cheeks. Grandma. Her voice was a ragged whisper. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Don't say anything, I told her sharply. Not one word until you have a lawyer. But she kept talking anyway, the words tumbling out like she was emptying a sack of stones. Elias asked me to take my car to his friend's apartment complex. Said he needed to put something in my trunk. Just a small personal document box, he said. For work. I didn't ask what was in it. I should have asked. I really should have. The officer gently pulled her away before I could respond. A weary-looking detective came out about 20 minutes later. Tall man, heavy shoulders, eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a week. Your granddaughter was pulled over for a cracked taillight, he explained. Routine stop. Officers found 3 kilograms of pure, uncut fentanyl in the trunk. That's a trafficking quantity that crosses state lines. We're talking about a mandatory minimum sentence. Where is Elias Thorne? I asked, leaning forward. He flipped through a thin notepad. The boyfriend? We don't have a current address for him. Phone's disconnected. Credit cards suddenly deactivated. Seems he vaporized. Of course he had. They assigned Clara a public defender named Ms. Dana Winters. I met her at the arraignment 3 days later. She was younger than I expected, carrying a worn briefcase that looked older than she was. Your granddaughter should absolutely take the plea deal, she advised me. We were standing in a cold courthouse hallway. Clara was still inside with the judge. If she goes to trial and loses, she's looking at 20 to 25 years. The district attorney is offering 15 if she pleads guilty to possession with intent to distribute. She says she didn't know about the drugs. She was set up. Dana Winters looked at me with the tired pity only professionals have for naive family members. Mrs. Vance, the drugs were in the car she was driving. The keys were in her hand. Her story about the invisible boyfriend is exactly what every defendant says. And sometimes it's true, but I've been doing this for 6 years. I've never seen a case where the boyfriend story held up. Not once. I wanted to tell her about the women I'd seen during all those years working in the prison's records department. Young women with stories just like Clara's, boyfriends who disappeared. Packages they didn't know they were carrying. As the chief of documentation, I had reviewed hundreds of admission files. I could spot the patterns. You develop an instinct for the truth. But Ms. Winters had already decided Clara was guilty. Clara took the plea deal. 15 years in the state correctional facility. The judge accepted it on a Thursday afternoon in November. Clara looked back at me from the defendant's table, and I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares about her mother. I went home to an empty house and sat at the kitchen table until the blue twilight turned to deep black. That's when I made the decision. Before my daughter Sarah was born, I was in business school, focused on accounting and corporate law. 3rd year, I got pregnant and dropped out to raise her alone. Her father was never interested. I took the first stable job I could find that offered good benefits and flexible hours. The records clerk position at the state correctional facility opened up when Sarah was 2. I never went back to finish my degree. I never became the auditor I'd planned to be. I spent 4 decades pushing paper and filing reports through the cell blocks instead. But I still had my university textbooks. Still remembered the classes on criminal procedure and evidence law. I'd watched hundreds of cases move through the system from the inside. I knew which ones worked and which ones collapsed. I had retired 3 years earlier at 68. I spent my mornings with coffee and Sudoku puzzles, afternoons tending my small backyard garden. A quiet life. A safe life. Not anymore. If Clara was going to survive 15 years, she needed someone who understood exactly how that place worked. And if there was any chance of proving she'd been set up, I needed to be close enough to find it. I called the prison administration office the next morning. I told them I wanted to come back as a volunteer. "We'd be honored to have you back, Eleanor," the coordinator said immediately. "A legend like you. When can you start?" "As soon as you'll let me." They approved me within 1 week. They are always short on reliable help, and my decades of service carried weight. Clara was transferred to the women's facility an hour north, the same complex where I'd spent most of my career. I knew the layout, knew the old guards, knew which administrators would look the other way and which ones followed every rule. My first volunteer shift was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I'd see Clara that weekend during visiting hours. I packed my old university textbooks into boxes that night. I sat on the floor of my bedroom surrounded by the books I hadn't opened in 45 years. Advanced criminal procedure, evidence and discovery, constitutional law. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the information was still correct. Clara didn't believe she'd been set up. She thought she'd been stupid, that this was her fault. But I'd seen this pattern before and I was going to prove it. I didn't know how long it would take. Months, maybe years, but I had time now. Nothing but time. The textbooks went back on my shelf. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. time to go back to work. The visitor's room smelled like old bleach and burnt coffee. I'd forgotten that specific institutional smell. Or maybe when I worked there I'd just become accustomed to it. They brought Clara in wearing ill-fitting, gray prison attire. She had lost noticeable weight. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, no makeup, and there was a dark purple bruise, clearly visible, spreading across her left cheekbone, almost reaching her eye. I stood up instantly. "What happened to your face?" "Nothing." She slid into the plastic seat across from me. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm fine, Grandma." "You're fine." Her voice cracked on the last word. We sat there in a suffocating silence. Around us, other incarcerated women talked quickly with their visitors. A woman 2 tables over was weeping quietly into her phone handset. A uniformed officer stood near the main door, arms crossed, monitoring everyone. Clara's hands were trembling violently on the table's surface. "Look at me, Clara," I commanded softly. She did. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted and hollow. This wasn't the angry, defiant girl who used to slam doors and tell me I didn't understand her life. This was someone who'd spent 3 weeks learning exactly how small and invisible she could make herself. "You're terrified," I said. "That's perfectly normal. I don't belong here." "I know. Nobody believes me." "I do." Her face crumbled instantly. She buried her head in her hands and started crying. Not quiet crying either, big, desperate, gasping sobs that made the guard glance sharply over. I reached across the table and put my hand firmly on her arm. The guard didn't intervene. "Listen to me," I said, speaking quickly and clearly. "You're going to survive this. But you need to do exactly what I tell you. Do you understand?" She nodded, unable to speak through the sobs. "First rule: keep your head down. Don't make friends too fast and don't make enemies at all. Be neutral." "Someone already hates me," she mumbled, lifting her head. "I don't even know why." "Did she hit you?" She said I looked at her wrong in the lunch line. I didn't even see her. She just pushed me, and I fell into the table. "Good," I said. "You didn't fight back. You did the right thing. Don't ever fight, Clara, unless you have absolutely no other choice. Hear me?" "Yes." Second rule: find a place in records or the legal aid office. It's quieter there. Stay out of the common day areas when you can. I'll talk to the administration. They'll let you volunteer. You're good with organization. It will give you structure and purpose. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Okay." We spent the next hour going over everything. Where to sit in the mess hall, which officers to trust, and which ones to avoid. I gave her a list of 3 names to avoid at all costs. How to respond when someone tried to start trouble, when to talk, and when to be completely silent. Clara listened to every word. For the first time in 5 years, she actually listened to me. I came back the next week. And the week after that. Every Saturday morning at 9, I sat in that visiting room and taught Clara how to survive. By the 3rd visit, the bruise on her face had yellowed and faded. By the 5th visit, she told me she'd started working in the legal resources section, a small office attached to the main library. By the 10th visit, she looked less like a frightened child and more like someone who understood her environment. My volunteer shifts started in late winter, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 3 to 7. I mostly worked in the records department, helping the one full-time clerk digitize old inmate intake files. Same gray walls, same sickly fluorescent lights, same depressing sound of heavy steel doors clanging shut. I saw Clara during my shift. Sometimes she'd be organizing documents in the small legal office, or filing papers in the back. We'd nod at each other, but we didn't talk. The other incarcerated women would notice if we did. My access to the old records became my base. I had access to legal resources, old case files that nobody ever looked at, and crucially, the space to talk to inmates casually without anyone paying undue attention. That's where I met Veronica. She was in her early 20s, long dark hair twisted into a thick braid, sitting at one of the public library desks with a stack of outdated law journals. I'd seen her around before, the quiet, scholarly type. I was reshelving near her when she spoke up quietly. "You used to run the records division, right?" she asked. I turned. "That's right. I remember you. You helped me get copies of my trial transcripts about 2 years ago." I did remember her now. Younger then, slightly more animated. "How is that going?" She laughed, but there was a sharp, bitter edge to it. "Not great, considering I'm still here." "What are you in for?" Trafficking. Got caught with my boyfriend's supply in my studio apartment. He swore it was high-grade nutritional supplements for his exclusive gym business. She shook her head slowly. I believed him. My hand froze on a shelf containing old sentencing guidelines. Where's the boyfriend now? Gone. Moved to the coast. Changed his name his whole life. Left me here holding the sentence, literally. I pulled a bulky case binder off my cart and slid it onto the shelf, making it look like this was just casual conversation. What was his name? Dominic Bell. At least that's what he called himself. Found out later he'd lied about that too. My pulse started to pick up speed. What did he look like? Tall, dark brown hair, drove this incredibly expensive sports car. A yellow and black one, really showy. Always wore designer clothes, very smooth talker. And he had this really unique, intricate tattoo. A stylized serpent coiled up on his left wrist. She looked down at her own hands. Some symbol. I kept my face perfectly neutral. How long have you been here? 4.5 years. Have another 3 to go. They didn't investigate the boyfriend. My public defender said there was no evidence he existed. It was my word against nothing. So, I took the plea deal because I was too terrified to go to trial. I finished sorting the binders on my cart. I'm sorry that happened to you, Veronica. Yeah, me too. I went home that night and pulled out a fresh spiral notebook I'd bought just for this purpose. I wrote down everything Veronica had told me. Dominic Bell, the $250,000 sports car, the stylized serpent tattoo, the specific way he disappeared. Elias Thorne. Dominic Bell. Different names, same predatory profile, same elaborate, cold-blooded method. It took me 3 more weeks to get Veronica alone again for a casual chat. This time I asked more specific, targeted questions. How they'd met, what he'd told her to gain her trust, the exact timeline of the package drop-off. Every single answer matched Clara's story. I started paying close attention to other women during my shifts. I reviewed more intake files, searched for similar charges, listened to their quiet conversations. By the following summer, I'd found 2 more women with nearly identical stories. Boyfriends who'd vanished, packages they hadn't known were illegal, public defenders who hadn't believed a word. I documented everything meticulously in my hidden notebook at home. Names, dates, descriptions. The pattern was clearly and terrifyingly present. I just needed more pieces to prove it was one man. Clara was noticeably different by fall, stronger, with a focused quietness about her. She figured out how to move through that facility without attracting hostility, ate her meals quickly, kept her eyes down, and spent her free time in the legal resources office, reading everything I could funnel to her. By the end of that first year, I told her what I'd found. We were in the visiting room. Clara was slowly sipping vending machine coffee that tasted like hot water and industrial solvent. I don't think you're the only one, honey, I said softly. She set down her cup instantly. What do you mean? Elias. Or whatever his actual name is. I think he's done this before. 2 other women so far besides you. At least 4 that I've found. Same pattern, different names, but the same man. Her face went pale, draining of color. Are they here in this prison? One of them is. Veronica. The others were in different facilities, but the paperwork came through the same way. Oh my God. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers against her forehead. So he's just out there, doing this to other innocent people? Looks like it. Can we prove it? Can we use this to get my case reopened? I don't know yet. I need more hard evidence, more women, something absolutely concrete that ties him to all of you, like a specific financial account or shared address. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the guards. Then she said, her voice firm, "What do you need me to do? Keep your head down. Stay safe. And let me handle this part, Grandma." She reached across the table, bypassing the coffee cups, and gently squeezed my hand. "Thank you for believing me. For coming back here." I squeezed her hand in return. "You're my granddaughter. Where else would I possibly be?" That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly. I'd found 4 women. There had to be more. How many more? 10? 20? And how was I going to prove it with just my little notebook? The notebook sat on my nightstand. I'd filled 40 pages already. Dates, names, descriptions, timelines. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a substantial start. By the time Clara had been inside for 18 months, I'd found 6 more women. Same heartbreaking story, different faces. Young, often vulnerable boyfriends who'd ask them to hold a package, drive a rental car, or store something at their apartment for just 1 week. Then the boyfriends vanished, and the women went to prison. 2 of them were at our facility. 4 more were scattered across the state's correctional centers. I reached out to my old contacts, retired records personnel, former administrative assistants, and asked careful, specific questions about past trafficking cases. The details lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. I kept a meticulous journal at home, hidden in my cedar closet under a stack of heirloom linens. Every name, every date, every description of the men who disappeared. The journal was getting thick. 10 women total by the end of that second year. 10 lives destroyed by men who were still free. Clara was different now, calmer but also highly focused. She'd figured out how to exist in that place without it breaking her spirit. She had a strict routine. Legal resource work in the mornings, intensive reading in the afternoons, phone calls to me twice a week in addition to our Saturday visits. But she was bored, intellectually starved. I could see it in the way she rapidly tapped her pen on the visiting room table, the way her eyes wandered during our conversations. You need something challenging for your mind, I told her one Saturday in March. Something more than organizing old appeal files. Like what? I'd brought an old, worn book with me. Introduction to Criminal Law. I slid it gently across the table to her. She picked it up, flipped through a few pages. What's this for? I was in university studying pre-law when your mother was born, I said. 3rd year. I had to drop out to raise her alone. Clara looked up at me, shocked. You never told me that. Never seemed relevant before. I gave it up to take care of Sarah. Then I took care of you. I never finished what I started. I leaned forward, lowering my voice conspiratorially. Grandma, let me teach you what I learned. Maybe you can finish what I started for both of us. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. She blinked them back hard. You really think I could do that? You are brilliant, Clara. Far smarter than you ever gave yourself credit for. And you've got the most precious resource right now, time. You might as well use it to build your future. She opened the book again, running her finger down the table of contents. Okay, yes, I want to try. I brought her a new book every visit after that. Criminal procedure, evidence review, case law analysis, the same textbooks I'd studied 4 decades ago. She devoured them. During our visits, I'd quiz her, ask her about the landmark cases she'd read, the constitutional principles she'd learned. She absorbed it all faster than I'd ever expected. She started asking me complex questions about jurisdiction and appellate review that I had to research before answering. By summer, she was reading actual appellate decisions. By fall, she was subtly helping other women understand their own complex legal situations. She had become a jailhouse lawyer. I'd watch her sometimes during my volunteer shifts. She'd sit at one of the heavy legal tables with another woman. Both of them bent over a thick file, Clara pointing out something on the page, explaining a complex ruling in a way that made perfect sense. The other woman would nod, write something down, and look at Clara like she had just handed her a lifeline. Clara had found her purpose. Our relationship had changed completely. We weren't grandmother and angry granddaughter anymore. We were partners, co-conspirators for justice, 2 people working toward the same all-consuming goal. The investigation kept growing. I'd figured out the boyfriend had used at least 5 different aliases. Elias Thorne, Clara's name, Dominic Bell, Veronica's name, plus Silas Green, Victor Cole, and Miles Webb. Different names, but the descriptions were identical. Tall, dark-haired, driving an ostentatious, expensive car, always the smooth-talking confidence, and always the same small, distinct stylized serpent tattoo on his left wrist. I made a visual chart at home, mapping out the timeline where he'd been, how long he'd spent with each woman before the setup. The pattern was glaringly clear once I laid it out visually. He targeted women who were already struggling, young, often financially strapped, typically with some form of troubled background. He'd date them for a few short months, gain their complete trust, then ask for a single easy favor. And that one favor landed them in prison for over a decade while he walked away completely clean. I called more contacts at other facilities, asking specifically about young women serving time for drug possession, describing the man. More names and more stories came back. By the time Clara entered her 3rd year inside, we'd identified 16 women. 16 lives shattered by the same narcissistic predator. I desperately needed a professional lawyer. Someone who could look at my overwhelming pattern evidence and tell me if there was any viable path to getting these convictions overturned. I remembered one of the other women's cases had been handled by an attorney named Mr. Henry Walsh. He worked for a small boutique litigation firm downtown. I'd seen his name on a few of the old case documents I'd pulled from the prison's legal library. I called his office on a Tuesday afternoon. "I have information about a massive ongoing pattern of wrongful convictions," I told his secretary. "Drug trafficking cases. Multiple women. Same perpetrator." She put me through. Henry Walsh sounded instantly stressed on the phone. "Ma'am, I truly appreciate your concern, but wrongful conviction cases are notoriously difficult to prove. The legal standard for overturning a plea deal is impossibly high." "I have documentation," I insisted. 16 women spanning 7 years. Same methods, same type of setup, same physical description, same unique tattoo. Silence on the other end. Then, in a slightly changed tone, "How detailed is this documentation exactly?" "Extremely. Can you bring it to my office immediately?" I went the next day, bringing my notebook, the chart, and every single piece of paper I'd meticulously collected. I spread it all out on his large mahogany conference room table. Henry Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, wearing expensive glasses and a silk tie. He looked at my intricate chart first, then started reading through the individual case summaries. He didn't say a word for nearly 30 minutes. Finally, he put down the last page and looked up at me. "This is genuinely incredible. Where did you get all this?" "I volunteer at the women's prison. I've been asking questions for over 2 years. And I'm doing this because my granddaughter is one of the 16. He nodded slowly. "I see. Mrs. Vance, can we help them?" He tapped his fingers on the table, staring at the chart. "If you can definitively prove this pattern, and if you can unequivocally identify the perpetrator, there are grounds for post-conviction relief. The problem, as you know, is finding him. These aliases are all likely fake. Do you have any physical evidence linking his true identity to these crimes?" "No. Just the women's testimony, the matching descriptions, and the undeniable pattern." "That's going to be very difficult. Courts are intensely reluctant to overturn guilty pleas based on pattern evidence alone. We need something concrete. Phone records, clear financial records, a photograph, anything that proves this man exists and connects him legally to all 16 cases." My chest went tight. 2 years of work. "So you're saying it's not enough?" "I'm saying it's a phenomenal start. The best start I've ever seen. But we need more than a pattern to win against the state. We need him." He looked at me over his glasses. "How committed are you to finding that final piece?" "I will commit however long it takes." "Then keep digging. Find out his real name. Find out where he is right now. Get me something I can take to a judge that they cannot dismiss." He promised he'd review the existing case files more carefully, searching for any legal angles we could pursue. He told me to call him the second I found anything new. I drove home feeling physically defeated. 2.5 years of work, and it still wasn't sufficient. That Saturday, I told Clara what the lawyer had said. She took it better than I expected. "So we keep going, Grandma?" "Yes, we do. We will find him eventually. Someone somewhere has to know who he truly is." "I hope so." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand hard. "Grandma, thank you for all of this. For not giving up on me. You are my granddaughter, Clara. I don't know how to give up on you." She smiled sadly, but her eyes were deadly serious. "I see you differently now. I understand what you sacrificed for my mom and for me. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I was too wrapped up in myself." My throat constricted with emotion. "You were young, honey. You were hurting. I was selfish. You were my granddaughter. That's the only thing that ever mattered." We sat there holding hands across the table until the officer called time. I went home and added Henry Walsh's contact information to my notebook. I drew a thick, determined line under the 16 names I'd found. There had to be more. And somewhere along the line, this man had made a critical mistake, left a real trail, used his true name just once. I just had to find it. Henry Walsh called me on a cold Wednesday morning in February. Mrs. Vance, I've reviewed the case files thoroughly. I've discussed this complex situation with my firm's partners. He paused, and I knew what was coming. I'm sorry, but we can't take this project on. I was standing in my kitchen. I slowly sat down on the nearest chair. Why not, Mr. Walsh? You said the documentation was incredible. It is incredible, truly. But it's too massive and too complicated. My partners think it's too risky. And honestly, the district attorney's office got wind that someone was looking into these specific cases. They made it absolutely clear they'd fight us on every single motion. My firm simply doesn't have the resources, the tens of thousands of dollars and the manpower, for that kind of protracted political battle. But you said if I found enough evidence. You've done stellar work, Mrs. Vance, really. But without concrete, irrefutable proof linking this man to the crimes, without even knowing his true verifiable identity, it's just not viable for a private firm to pursue. I apologize deeply. He hung up quickly. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour, staring at the dust motes floating in the sunlight. 2.5 years of my life dismissed over the phone. That Saturday I told Clara. Her face went blank. The way it used to look when she was a little girl and something hurt too much to process. So that's it, Grandma? She asked, her voice dangerously flat. We just give up now? I didn't say that, Clara. We just need to find a different lawyer. But without a lawyer, we keep going? She looked down at her hands, which were no longer trembling, but still tightly clenched. Grandma, I've been in here 3.5 years. Maybe this is just how it is. Maybe I need to accept it. I have 11 more years left. Maybe I should just. Don't finish that sentence, I said, my voice rising sharply. But she did anyway. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Maybe I was stupid enough that I deserved to be here. My chest went tight and hot with a fierce protective anger. You think I spent all this time teaching you law so you could give up? You think I gave up my university dreams to raise your mother, so you could waste what I taught you? She looked up, startled by the intensity of my voice. I never became a lawyer, Clara, I continued, leaning across the table until I was only inches from her face. I wanted to help people, innocent people. That was the whole plan for my life. But I had your mother and that plan changed. Then I had you, and I thought maybe that dream was just gone forever. I paused to let the truth sink in. But it is not gone. You are going to finish what I started. You are going to become the lawyer I never got to be. And together we are going to prove what happened to you and every other girl he destroyed. Clara's eyes instantly filled with tears. They spilled over, running down her face in silent streams. I'm sorry, Grandma, she choked out. For everything. For not listening to you, for being so angry all the time. For not seeing what you gave up for me, and for Mom. I know I wasted so much time hating you. You were a kid, Clara. You were hurting. We moved past it now. I'm still so sorry. I reached across the table and took her hands firmly. We are not giving up. You hear me? Not ever. She nodded, wiping her face roughly with her sleeve. Okay. What do we do next? We keep documenting. We keep looking. Something will break eventually. It absolutely has to. But things got exponentially harder after that. Officer Kessel started watching me during my volunteer shifts. I'd known him when I was the chief of records. He was one of the guards I had told Clara to avoid. He had cold, flat eyes and a dismissive way of talking to incarcerated women that always made my skin crawl. He'd never paid any attention to me before, back when I was just processing intake files and staying quiet. But now I was asking deeper, specific questions, and he had noticed. He'd appear in the records office while I was working, stand by the door with his arms crossed, watching my every move. Say nothing. Then one day he stopped me in the maintenance hallway, effectively blocking my path. Mrs. Vance, need to talk to you about your volunteer clearance. What about it, Officer Kessel? My pulse was hammering. There have been some internal concerns about you spending too much unauthorized time with certain inmates, asking questions about sensitive old cases. I kept my voice calm. I'm helping them find legal resources. That's explicitly part of my approved volunteer work. Right. Well, we're going to need to restrict your access a bit. As of today, you'll be strictly limited to the main records storage area. No more visits to the cell blocks or the main library wing. On whose authority? Mine, ma'am. He smiled, a tight, unpleasant gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Just following new facility protocol, ma'am. After that, I couldn't move freely through the prison anymore. I couldn't talk to incarcerated women casually outside the records office. I couldn't build connections the way I had before. Kessel was a deliberate roadblock. He had to be connected to the drug operation somehow. Maybe he was getting a large monthly payment to look the other way, or perhaps he was involved more directly in facilitating the predator. Either way, my questions had clearly made someone very rich and very nervous. 2 weeks later, I found my mailbox hanging open. The little door bent like someone had forcefully pried it with a crowbar. Inside was a note on plain white paper, folded into a crisp square. Block letters written in crude, thick black marker. Stop asking questions. Go home. I stood on my porch holding that chilling note. Elias Thorne or Kessel or whoever was behind this knew precisely where I lived, knew exactly what I was doing, and wanted me to stop immediately. I thought about calling the local police, but what would I tell them? That someone who might be connected to a drug trafficker I couldn't identify had left me a vague, threatening note? They'd think I was a paranoid elderly woman, or worse, they'd tell me to stop my entire investigation for my own safety. I went inside and systematically locked every door and window in the house. I sat on my couch with all the lights off, watching the quiet street through the curtains. I was 71 years old, living alone in a house at the end of a long, quiet cul-de-sac. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt genuine paralyzing fear. I thought about stopping. I truly considered it. I was tired, I was old, and I was deeply scared. But then I pictured Clara sitting in that prison for 11 more years, and I thought about the other 15 women. I thought about how many more he might be setting up right now while I sat here trembling. Kessel must have told him. That was the only possible explanation. How else would Elias Thorne know what I was asking? The women I was talking to were all inside the prison. Someone on the inside had to be feeding highly sensitive information out. I went back to the prison that next Tuesday. Kessel was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his patrol car, watching me walk toward the gate. I kept my head high, fixed my eyes forward, and walked past him without acknowledging his presence. Inside, I found a younger volunteer named Amy. She'd started a few months earlier, bright-eyed, earnest, and still had full, unrestricted access to the entire facility, including the cell blocks. Sweet girl, maybe 25, studying sociology at the nearby university. Amy, can I ask you a huge favor? Of course, Mrs. Vance. I need you to talk to some women for me. Ask them about their cases, specifically about drug trafficking convictions where the boyfriend suddenly disappeared. And the package was a surprise. She looked momentarily confused. Why? I'm developing research for a major legal advocacy project. A documentary, potentially. Would you help me gather the data? She instantly agreed. Over the next several months, she asked the questions I couldn't ask anymore. She came back with names, stories, and specific details. She was careful. She didn't draw attention the way I had. By the end of that 4th year, Amy had helped me find 4 more women with the same heartbreaking story. That made 20 total. Clara was different now, too. Harder, more institutionalized. She'd been locked up for 4 years. That kind of environment changes a person fundamentally. She still studied law diligently, still helped other women with their legal issues, but there was a guarded edge to her that hadn't been there before. During one visit, she told me about a fight she'd had to personally break up. 2 women aggressively going at each other in the library. Clara had stepped between them and taken an elbow sharply to the ribs. You should have called the guards immediately, I said, aghast. Wasn't enough time. Besides, I handled it myself. She had. But it scared me, the casual, emotionless way she said it, like violence was just a routine part of her day now. This place was changing her, the same way it changes everyone who stays too long. I desperately needed to get her out before prison became the only reality she could remember. That winter, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook spread out. 20 names, 5 fake identities for the same man. Phone numbers that led nowhere. Descriptions that all matched but couldn't be verified. 4 years of exhausting work, and I still didn't have enough. The threat note from my mailbox sat on the table next to me, a constant reminder that I was getting dangerously close to something powerful. He had made a mistake somewhere. They always do. I just had to find it. I turned to a clean page in the notebook and started making a new list. Everything I knew, everything I still desperately needed to find. Somewhere out there, this man had used his one true name, left one real financial trail, connected himself to one of these women in a way that could be definitively proven. And I was going to find it. Clara had been inside for nearly 5 years when a young lawyer finally showed up. He was waiting patiently outside the prison's legal resources office. He looked far too young to be an attorney. He stood up immediately when he saw me. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Marcus Kim, from the Public Defender's Appeals Unit." I stopped dead in the hallway. "I'm not looking for another lawyer, thank you." "I know, ma'am, but I'd like to talk to you anyway. One of the inmates mentioned your name. Said you've been helping women with specific wrongful conviction cases." "Who told you that?" "Veronica Martinez. I'm handling her appeal. She said you've been investigating a pattern. Multiple women, same setup, same perpetrator." I looked at him more carefully. He was young, maybe late 20s, with dark, neatly combed hair and thin, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple suit that looked brand new but was clearly department store quality, carrying a beaten-up, heavy leather briefcase. "What's your professional interest in this?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I've been following pattern-based wrongful convictions since law school. This case sounds exactly like the kind of systemic pattern that gets overlooked because nobody in the system connects the dots." He shifted his briefcase onto his other hip. "Can we talk, Mrs. Vance? Just 15 minutes. I have a shift starting in 10. Then let's make it 10. We sat on a cold stone bench near the staff entrance. I told him everything I had. 20 women across 8 different facilities. 5 fake names for the same man. Same physical description. Same method. Same distinctive serpent tattoo. Marcus Kim pulled out his own small, thin notebook and started writing furiously. "How detailed is your documentation, Mrs. Vance? It contains everything I've found over 4 years." 3 days later, I brought my central notebook to his tiny windowless office. I spread everything out on his desk. 5 years of names, dates, descriptions, timelines, the immense chart I'd made connecting all 20 cases. He didn't say anything for nearly 30 minutes. He just read through it all, taking small, rapid notes, occasionally asking a precise, clarifying question. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wide with a professional intensity. "Mrs. Vance, this is better than most professional criminal investigations I've ever seen. You've built a real case here. The last lawyer said it wasn't enough. The last lawyer was wrong, ma'am. He was protecting his firm's bottom line. This is a clear, undeniable pattern. If we can identify the perpetrator and prove he contacted these women using traceable means, we have undeniable grounds for post-conviction relief." He tapped the chart again. "I know we need his real identity and some concrete evidence. But you, ma'am, have done the truly hard part. You've found the pattern. Now we just need to find him. Your public defender's office will actually support this?" "I'll make sure they do," he promised, gathering the papers protectively. "This is exactly the kind of case the public defender's office should be taking. Systemic, pattern-based wrongful convictions, multiple victims. I will take this pro bono myself. We'll start with Clara's case and build from there." A sudden immense weight loosened from my chest that had been sitting there for 5 years. "Thank you, Marcus." He offered a rare, genuine smile. "Thank me, Mrs. Vance, when we get your granddaughter out." Marcus Kim moved with an intensity one hadn't seen in Henry Walsh. Within 2 weeks, he'd interviewed 12 of the women, filed urgent motions to access specific case files and police reports, and started the crucial process of subpoenaing years of phone and digital records. By April, we'd found 3 more women who fit the exact profile. That made 23 victims total, spanning 9 long years. All with stories that matched too perfectly to be coincidence. Then in May, we got the incredible stroke of luck we'd been praying for. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Turn on the news, Mrs. Vance. Channel 8. I grabbed the remote and flicked on the television. The local news anchor was standing in front of a police precinct. They cut to a mugshot on the screen. A man with dark, slicked-back hair, a smug chin, wearing a standard orange booking uniform. The caption below read, "Miles Webb arrested for felony assault and extortion." "That's him," Marcus said on the phone. "Which name is that?" I whispered, staring at the screen. "Miles Webb. It's one of them, but this is better. His long-term girlfriend called the police during a domestic dispute. When they arrested him, they ran his fingerprints and ran his social security number. His true legal name is Elias Thorne." I gripped the phone tightly, sinking onto my couch. The man who had destroyed my Clara and 22 other women was finally in custody. "And here's the best part, Mrs. Vance," Marcus continued, his voice ringing with triumph. "When they processed him, his fingerprints matched evidence lifted from the cars in 4 of the early drug cases. DNA from discarded materials matched 5 others. The prosecution kept that physical evidence, even after the convictions, in secure storage. So, we can definitely link him to the specific crime scenes, not just the pattern." The feeling was overwhelming, a mixture of validation and raw relief. "We can link him." "Yes, ma'am. And once I successfully subpoena his verified phone records, the numbers tied to his real identity, we can prove he contacted every single one of them around the time of their arrests. The defense lawyer can't argue against 20 women and DNA. It took 3 excruciating months for the phone and financial records to come through the courts. When they did, the pattern was not just undeniable, it was a mathematical certainty. The same phone number and the same masked prepaid credit cards linked to Elias Thorne had contacted 21 out of the 23 women. Text messages, dozens of calls, all within days or weeks of their respective arrests. Then, chillingly, total silence. Marcus immediately filed motions for post-conviction relief for Clara and 8 others, the 9 women with the strongest evidence linking Thorne's fingerprints or DNA to their cases. He said, "We'll use these 9 strong cases to irrefutably establish the pattern of criminal coercion, and then we'll go after the rest of the victims." That's when things got brutally complicated. The district attorney's office fought us fiercely on every single motion. They argued that the original convictions were sound, that the women had already pleaded guilty to secure shorter sentences, and that there was no new evidence to support overturning the cases. They argued that my notebook was hearsay, and the women were simply lying to get out of jail. But Marcus Kim didn't back down 1 inch. He presented the phone records, the verified fingerprint matches, the DNA evidence, and the overwhelming financial flow that tracked Thorne's systematic movement across the state. He brought in 2 of the victims I had found to testify about Elias Thorne, about how he had approached them, gained their vulnerable trust, and cold-bloodedly set them up for decades in prison. Officer Kessel got quietly suspended in August. It turned out the Internal Affairs investigation, which had been tracking him for months, found irrefutable evidence that he'd been taking substantial cash payments from someone connected to Thorne's drug operation. When they searched his bank records, there were specific deposits that perfectly lined up with the exact dates when I, and later Amy, had been asking questions about the missing boyfriends. My questions and my fear had been real. The appeal hearings dragged on for nearly 6 agonizing months. Every week, Marcus would call me with the technical updates. Every Saturday, I'd tell Clara what was happening. She was different now. She was 25 years old, having been locked up for almost 5 full years. She'd helped 12 other women successfully file initial appeals and petitions while we waited for her own case. She spent every available minute in the law library, reading cases, taking careful notes, and drafting formal legal arguments. She had turned into exactly what I'd hoped she would, a fighter. Someone who could not back down. In December, precisely 5 years after Clara had been sentenced, we finally got the hearing that truly mattered. The judge was an older woman named Justice Helena Reyes, with silver hair pulled back tightly and piercing, sharp eyes. She had read every brief, reviewed every piece of evidence Marcus had submitted, and listened to 3 full days of emotional testimony from the women Elias Thorne had destroyed. On the 3rd tense day, she asked to see my notebook. Marcus brought it immediately to the bench. The judge spent a silent 20 minutes going through it, reading my cramped notes, studying the intricate timeline I'd built across 40 pages. Then she looked up over the bench. "Mrs. Vance, you are the grandmother?" I stood up, my knees trembling. "Yes, Your Honor." "You spent 5 years methodically documenting all of this yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." "While volunteering in the same facility where your granddaughter was incarcerated?" She looked back down at the notebook for a long moment. She closed the cover and handed it back to Marcus. The evidence presented in this chamber is not just compelling, Mr. Kim. It is a damning indictment of the initial investigation and the pattern of criminal exploitation perpetrated by Mr. Thorne. She looked directly at me. This is genuinely remarkable work, Mrs. Vance. Thank you, Your Honor. I will have my final ruling by Friday morning. Friday came. I was awake at 5 a.m. pacing the kitchen. Marcus called me at 6 o'clock sharp. We won, Mrs. Vance. We did it. He told me the judge had vacated Clara's conviction and sentence, ruling that she was an undeniable victim of criminal coercion and systemic fraud. 8 others received the exact same ruling. The rest of the cases were being fast-tracked for review. I sat down on my cold kitchen floor and wept. 5 years. Clara's physical release was scheduled for 2 weeks later, in the second week of January, 5 years and 2 months after she'd been sentenced to 15 years. I went to see her that Saturday. I told her the news in person. She didn't cry immediately. She just sat there, staring at me across the visiting room table, the noisy sounds of the room fading away. "It's real, Grandma," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "It's actually real. I'm getting out. You're getting out, Clara. You're coming home." Then she broke. She put her head down on the table and sobbed big, wrenching, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. I reached across the table and held her shaking hand while the guards pretended not to notice. When she finally looked up, her face was red and wet, but her eyes were clear. "You never gave up on me, Grandma. You are my granddaughter. I don't know how to." 5 years, she repeated, squeezing my hand tight. "You spent 5 years fighting for me, risking your own safety. And you spent 5 years becoming the incredible, purposeful young woman I always knew you could be, Clara. I'm going to help them," she vowed, wiping her face. "The others. The ones still waiting. I'm going to use everything I learned here." "I know you will, honey. And Grandma." She looked at me with an expression of pure love and gratitude. "Thank you for everything. For believing in me when nobody else on earth did." I drove home that afternoon with the low winter sun blinding the horizon. 5 years. It had taken 5 years, 2 months, 23 victims, and 1 selfless young lawyer. But we had done it. Clara was coming home. I got to the prison complex at the first sign of dawn. I stood outside the massive, cold gates with my heavy winter coat buttoned up against the biting January air, watching the sky slowly turn from deep black to bruised gray, and finally to a pale, hopeful blue. The gates opened precisely at 7 a.m. Clara walked out wearing new, comfortable jeans and a heavy wool sweater I brought her the week before. She had left her hair down, reaching her shoulders in soft waves. It had been 5 years since I'd seen her with her hair truly down. She stopped instantly when she saw me. She just stood there, on the other side of the chain-link barrier, staring out at the freedom she had earned. I walked over slowly, tears starting to blur my vision. I reached through the space between the bars and hugged her tightly. She was taller than I remembered, stronger in her shoulders, but she held on to me like she was 5 years old again, small and afraid. 5 years, she whispered into my shoulder, the word thick with disbelief. "You came every single week for 5 years, Grandma. Where else would I be, Clara?" She pulled back, looking at me directly. Her eyes were wet, shining. "I don't know how to thank you for this. You already did. You survived. You learned. You became exactly who you were supposed to be." We drove home with the windows cracked open, even though it was freezing. Clara kept turning her head to look at everything around us. The tall, bare trees, the small houses, the cars accelerating smoothly on the highway. A child bundled in a bright red snowsuit, building a snowman in someone's front yard. "It's so incredibly big out here," she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "I honestly forgot how vast everything is." At home, she walked slowly through every room, touching the furniture, running her hand along the kitchen counter, looking out the back windows, standing in the living room like she'd never seen it before. "Your room is the same," I told her gently. "I didn't change a single thing." She went upstairs, came back down about 30 minutes later with red, swollen eyes. That first week was incredibly difficult. We went to the large supermarket, and she suffered a full-blown panic attack in the bright, noisy breakfast cereal aisle. Too many choices, too many people moving too quickly, too much aggressive lighting and background music. We left the full cart abandoned and went straight home. She couldn't sleep in her own bedroom. She said the absolute silence was deafening, the darkness too complete. She slept on the living room couch with the television set on low volume for the first month. Little unexpected things startled her violently. The refrigerator compressor kicking on, a door slamming somewhere outside, a person walking up behind her unexpectedly. But she improved slowly, steadily. I helped her the same way I'd helped her survive prison. One day at a time, very small steps and endless patience. 3 more women got their convictions officially vacated by March. Marcus Kim kept working tirelessly on the rest of the cases. He said it would take more time, but the established pattern of coercion was now legally sound. The remaining 20 cases would be reviewed systematically. Elias Thorne went to trial in late April. I didn't go to the courthouse. Neither did Clara. We watched the verdict announcement together on the evening news. The headline flashed across the screen. Guilty on all counts. Drug trafficking, conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud and exploitation. 25 years in a maximum security prison. A sentence far longer than any of the women he had set up had served. Clara turned off the television when the news cut to commercial. She didn't say anything. She just sat there quietly staring at the dark screen. "Are you okay, honey?" I asked, reaching for her hand. "Yeah. I just thought I'd feel different. Like this wave of closure or satisfaction. But I just feel incredibly tired." "That's normal, Clara. Exhaustion." "Is it? You spent 5 years fighting that man in that system. Now you don't have to fight anymore. That kind of sudden cessation of battle is exhausting in a completely different way." She nodded slowly. "What do I do now, Grandma?" "You live, Clara. You figure out what you want your actual life to be. You take your time. You heal." Clara enrolled in community college that fall. She started with basic foundational classes: English composition, mathematics, history survey. She said she desperately needed to remember how to be a normal student again before she could even think about law school. She was 26 by then. She lived at home with me. She secured a meaningful part-time job working at a legal aid advocacy center downtown. She studied at night with a relentless focus. Some days were genuinely good. Other days, she'd come home and go straight to her room, and I wouldn't see her until the next morning. But she kept pushing forward. By the time she turned 27, she had successfully transferred to the university, starting on her pre-law track. Her grades were flawless. She studied the way she had studied in prison, like her entire future life depended on it. She applied to law school the following year, got accepted to 4 schools, and chose the one closest to home. "You don't have to stay nearby for me, Clara," I told her, wanting her to feel completely free. "You can go wherever you want in the world." "I know, Grandma," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "But I want to stay here with you. We still have work to do here." The 3 rigorous years she spent in law school were the best years we'd had since she was a very small child. She would come home on Friday evenings, tell me excitedly about her classes, and ask my expert opinion on complex evidence cases she was studying. Sometimes we'd sit together at the kitchen table with legal textbooks and heavy binders spread between us, and it felt like we were both finally truly doing what we were meant to do. She volunteered full-time at the Legal Aid Advocacy Center throughout all 3 years. She helped 6 more innocent people get their wrongful convictions formally overturned. She used everything I'd taught her, everything she'd learned in prison, and every ethical tool Marcus Kim had shown her about building an ironclad case. We went to every single one of their release hearings together. We watched them walk out of the courtroom doors as completely free individuals. Clara would cry every single time, her face wet with empathetic tears. I'd hold her hand, and we'd sit there quietly while the courtroom emptied around us. We were 2 old allies in the fight for justice. Graduation day arrived on a sunny Saturday in May. I sat in the university audience wearing the brand new dress I bought special for the occasion, watching hundreds of students in black robes file into their seats. Clara was near the back of the mass. I could barely see her from where I sat, but I knew exactly where she was. The dean started reading the names. One by one, students walked across the stage, accepted their diplomas, and moved their academic tassels from right to left. Then I heard it. Clara Vance, Juris Doctor, magna cum laude. My eyes instantly filled up. I watched her walk across that stage, shake the dean's hand, and confidently hold up her diploma. She looked out into the vast audience, found my face in the crowd, and smiled the most powerful, radiant smile I had ever seen. I smiled back through my tears. After the ceremony, I waited outside while families took pictures and students hugged each other. Clara came through the massive crowd, carrying her cap and gown, her degree clutched in her hand. She walked straight to me and held out the diploma. "This is yours as much as mine, Grandma," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You started this dream 48 years ago. I just finished it for both of us." I took the thick paper, looked down at her name printed in formal script. Clara Vance, Juris Doctor. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Clara," I said, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I wouldn't be here without you. You know that, right? You did the work, honey. I just taught you how to start." She hugged me again tight. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. For never ever giving up. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For spending 5 years of your own life proving I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Clara." We stood there in the May sunshine, surrounded by celebrating, shouting families, holding that hard-won diploma between us, the one I'd started working toward almost 50 years ago when I was her age, the one she'd finished for us both. Clara's friends called her over for pictures. She went, laughing, still in her graduation robes. I watched her. 29 years old, a lawyer, strong, brilliant, capable, and ready to help other people the way we'd helped her. Ready to fight tirelessly for people who had absolutely no one else left to fight for them. She'd spent 5 years in prison, but she had come out better than she went in. Not broken, not bitter, just determined, purposeful, and profoundly grateful. And I'd spent 5 years fighting to free her. 5 years that had given me back the purpose I'd lost when I dropped out of law school all those years ago. We had saved each other completely. I looked down at the diploma in my hands one more time. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. Clara glanced back at me, still smiling. I nodded at her, a silent recognition of our shared victory. She nodded back. We had finished what we started, both of us. So that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. If you were in my place, would you have risked your safety to re-enter the prison and fight for your estranged granddaughter? Or would you have believed the system? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more stories like mine.